They came for him during the second moon cycle of the Earth winter, when the sky was black and the ground was covered in snow, when the stars above Earth were silent and cold and far away from the war that had just ended. Sergeant Dean Riker stood in the snow with his wrists bound by plasma cuffs, his breath like smoke in the cold air, and his eyes locked on the sky, where the alien ship waited above the clouds, spinning in place like a hunter above its prey. The war was over, but Riker was not free because the aliens who had watched the war saw him as something else, not a soldier, not a man, but a thing from a death world. Earth was known across the galaxy as Class 15, the highest level of danger a planet could have: volcanoes, earthquakes, toxic air, deadly life forms, and worst of all, humans who had survived it all and become something different. They called him Deathworlder. They feared him, and yet they wanted to test him. So they took him far from Earth across the dark, cold space and dropped him onto a prison world called Zirian 9. Zirian 9 was not just a prison, it was a pit, a cage of metal and fire floating around a dying red sun, where light came in waves and shadows crawled across the floor like living things. The prison was known for one thing. No one survived it. The inmates were killers from 100 worlds, beasts with claws the size of swords and minds twisted by war and blood and darkness. Warlords from fallen empires, mutants from failed science stations, mercenaries with no souls and no past. And now one human. When the transport ship arrived above the prison, the guards looked at the manifest and laughed. A human, they said, weak, soft, too emotional, too slow. They thought he would cry or beg. But Riker walked out of the ship with his head high, his eyes cold and clear, taking in every hallway, every camera, every guard weapon, every lock and door. He said nothing. He made no sound as they scanned his body, injected tracking nanites into his neck, and stripped him of everything he once owned except his name and his memory. He was processed like meat. A number was burned into his arm in glowing ink, and a voice in the loudspeaker called his name like it was nothing. Inmate Riker, 77,166. He was given no weapons, no armor, just gray prison clothes and hard boots, and was sent down the main elevator shaft to the lower levels of Zirian 9, where the worst of the worst were kept in silence and rage. Guards with black armor and glowing visors pushed him forward through long corridors with flickering lights and walls that pulsed with power from the core of the station. Inmates watched from their cells, their eyes like red lights in the dark. Some hissed, some growled, others whispered in their native tongues, but none of them smiled. Riker still said nothing. One guard nudged another and whispered that the human looked broken. Already, just wait until cell block 66, where the Real monsters lived. Another guard laughed and said the human would not last a day, not even an hour. Maybe they would bet rations on how long before he screamed. But Riker only walked and listened and counted steps and doors and watched how the cameras blinked and where the guards kept their stun rifles and how the floor vibrated every time the power core shifted. He was not scared. He was learning. The elevator finally stopped at the bottom level where the lights were red and the air smelled like metal and heat and oil. The gate opened, and two guards took him by the arms and pulled him forward until they reached a long hall of thick black doors, each marked with strange alien symbols glowing faint blue. These were the danger cells, not just for prisoners, but for creatures too violent for chains, too smart for walls, too deadly for the other inmates. At the end of the hall was cell 66. The guards paused there for a moment, as if unsure, as if waiting for something to go wrong. Inside cell 66 were 3 doors. Left cell housed an alien named Karnak, a creature from the blood moons of Soren with 4 arms and skin like obsidian stone. His crimes were unspoken, but legend said he had ended 3 species before breakfast. Right cell belonged to Vekral, a silent killer from the ice planet Dravox with white eyes and bone claws, and a mind untouched by fear. He once ate his own jailer after escaping a gravity cage. The center door opened with a hiss, and the guards shoved Riker inside. The room was small, no windows, only a steel bed, a sink, and a glowing red line on the floor marking where not to cross when the door was open. They left him there, and the door shut behind him with a sound like the end of the world. Darkness came for a moment, then dim lights hummed to life. Riker sat down on the bed, slowly, stretching his arms, testing the room, watching for weaknesses in the wall, and listening to the breathing from the cells beside him. He was not alone. Karnak growled something in his native tongue on the left. Vekral scratched his claws against the metal wall on the right. Neither one spoke Galactic Common, but their messages were clear. This is our territory. You are meat. You are prey. Riker lay back and stared at the ceiling, blinking slowly, letting his mind replay every sound, every step from the moment he landed. He was not afraid of Karnak or Vekral. He had fought worse on Earth. Worse in the mud of the Black Ridge. Worse in the burning streets of New Cairo. He closed his eyes for a second, then opened them again, as if testing his body, checking for weakness. There was none. He was ready, and they did not know it yet. But he was not here to die. He was here to watch and wait. Because in a place where everyone was a monster, the real threat was the man who never roared, who never begged, who never blinked. And now that man was in cell 66, right between two monsters, and they were about to learn the true meaning of fear. The first night inside cell 66 was quiet, but not silent, because quiet in Xeria 9 was never safe and silence was never real. Sergeant Dean Riker sat still on his bunk, arms crossed, eyes open, listening to every sound through the metal walls that separated him from Karnak on the left and Vekral on the right, two of the most feared inmates in the entire galaxy. Karnak snorted in his sleep, a deep rumble, like a volcano dreaming. Vekral scratched at the walls again with his claws, dragging them slowly down the surface, making a high screeching sound that echoed in the air like a warning. Riker did not move. He had fought in mud and ash on Earth. He had survived collapsing bunkers, sniper fire acid storms, and things with too many teeth to count, but nothing like this. This place was different. Here, nothing wanted to win, everything only wanted to watch something else suffer. He had already learned the rules of Xeria 9 in his first few hours. Rule 1, never trust a guard. Rule 2, never speak unless needed. Rule 3, never back down. The next day, the lights flickered on at half power the way they always did in the lower levels. The alarms buzzed with that strange humming sound like a dying beast, and a meal slot opened with a hiss, dropping a gray block onto the floor. Riker picked it up, sniffed it, and took a small bite. It was dry, tasteless, and cold, but enough to keep a body alive. Karnak slammed his own block against the wall, then roared in anger, and Riker heard something break behind the left wall. Vekral made no sound at all. After mealtime, the guards opened the door and ordered Riker to move to the yard for the morning shift. 2 guards led him through the hallway again, past other danger cells where twisted creatures watched him through cracks and vents, eyes glowing like fireflies in the dark. The yard was a wide open space filled with broken metal weights, rusted machinery, and cracked ground where other prisoners paced in circles or stared at nothing. Riker stepped into the sunless light, and the stares turned to him at once. A few laughed, pointing at the human. One of them, a tall reptilian with black scales, stepped forward and spoke in the common tongue. "Tiny things should not be here. Go back to your planet, ape." The other inmates chuckled, but Riker did not reply. He looked the creature up and down, then turned and walked toward the weights, ignoring the taunts. This made the reptilian angry. He followed Riker and slammed a hand on the table in front of him. "You hear me, meat." Riker glanced at the hand, then at the face, then went back to lifting a bent metal bar like it was part of his routine. The reptilian snarled and swung with full force. The punch landed on Riker's back, but Riker only staggered forward slightly, his breath steady. He stood up, turned around, and moved fast. Faster than any of them expected. He ducked the next punch, grabbed the creature's wrist, twisted it hard, and dropped him to the ground with a move so smooth it looked like water flowing over stone. No one made a sound. The reptilian gasped in pain, but Riker did not hit him again. He let go and walked away toward the edge of the yard, as if nothing had happened. The guards on the wall above watched, silently whispering to each other. The other inmates stared as Riker picked up the metal bar again and resumed lifting it like before. The whispers began. Some said the human was dangerous. Others said he was lucky, but a few looked at him with new eyes. Later in the mess hall, the same reptilian, now limping, sat at the far end of the room, eyes lowered, refusing to meet Riker's gaze. Riker sat alone. He still spoke, no words. He ate the same gray block and drank the same bitter liquid and watched everyone without blinking. Every move was measured, every breath counted. The guards kept watching him too. One of them, a younger one, named Cyril, leaned toward another and said, "He gives me the creeps." The older guard shook his head and said, "No, this one is different." That night, Riker returned to cell 66 and heard nothing from the left or the right. No growls, no scratching, only silence. But not peace. Never peace. He sat on his bed and looked at the walls and wondered how many days would pass before something truly dangerous came for him. He could feel it building. The attention, the pressure, like a storm ready to break open above his head. But Riker had always been ready for storms. He was born in one, made in war, forged in fire. Even now he did not sleep. He closed his eyes only for seconds at a time, resting one part of his mind while the other stayed awake, listening to every heartbeat through the metal walls around him. He thought of Earth, of the mountains he trained in, of the cities now quiet after the war. He thought of his old unit now gone, and of the mission that led him here. The aliens thought they had captured him, but they were wrong. He had let himself be taken. He had chosen this path, because inside the worst place in the galaxy, he would find something more dangerous than monsters. He would find truth. He would find power. He would find the ones pulling the strings behind the war. And to do that, he had to survive Cell 66. So he waited. He listened. He learned. And in the cold light of the lower level, Riker sat between Karnak and Vekral, two beasts who had never respected anyone. And for the first time, they said nothing. They watched, and they waited, because even monsters can smell something worse than themselves. Even killers know when something has come that does not fear death. And Riker was that thing. He was not noise. He was not fire. He was silence. He was the cold breath before the storm, and the storm was just beginning. The lights dimmed as the transport doors opened wide, letting in cold air and silence, followed by chains and shadows and whispers of fear that crawled across the walls like ghosts. Another batch of prisoners had arrived from the outer colonies, broken soldiers, mad scientists, runaway, killers, creatures with scars across their minds and metal burned into their skin. But one figure walked at the front, without chains, without fear, without a word. General Kolth. The name alone made old inmates flinch, made guards tighten their grips on rifles, made the walls of Zirian 9 feel colder and tighter, like the prison itself wanted to shrink away. Kolth was not just a warlord. He was a monster with a crown. His empire had turned 4 moons into glass, had emptied rivers with sonic weapons, had crushed rebellions with claws instead of words. And he had history with Earth. He had history with Riker. Guards pushed open the holding gate, and Kolth stepped into the main block, his yellow eyes, glowing, his horns scraped from battle, his chest marked with 1,000 victories and 1 defeat. That defeat was named Riker. The two had faced each other years ago on a ruined battlefield above the city of Thessar Prime, where smoke and ash painted the sky, and Riker had left Kolth bleeding under rubble while Earth forces advanced. Kolth had sworn vengeance. Now he was in the same prison. When Kolth saw Riker across the yard, his eyes narrowed, and his grin cut through the air like a blade made of hate. He did not attack, not yet. He watched. He waited. He planned. Guards knew of the past between them and expected blood to spill in the first hour, but it did not happen. Riker continued his routine. He trained alone in the corner, lifted steel bars, ran quiet laps through the yard, mapped the cameras, and checked the patterns of the guards. Kolth began gathering old followers, inmates who still remembered the name of his broken empire. He whispered promises of return, of fire, of freedom, if they helped him crush the human. Some listened. Others feared. But one thing became clear in just 2 days. This was a war being reborn. Riker said nothing, but saw everything. He saw who passed notes in the mess hall, who met in the showers too long, who traded scraps for weapons made from pipes and sharpened stone. He knew the shape of a strike before it formed. When the ambush came, it came fast. 3 of Kolth's men cornered Riker behind the old generator, where cameras were blind and guards were deaf. They moved with blades and rage and speed that would kill any normal prisoner. But Riker was not normal. He dropped the first with a twist of the wrist, disarming him and using his momentum to slam him into the wall. The second came low with a jagged spike aimed for the ribs. Riker sidestepped, grabbed a loose pipe from the floor, and brought it down on the attacker's leg, bending it backward with a scream. The third paused, then ran. Riker let him go. Let him carry the message. The human is not weak. He is not prey. He is death in silence. Later that night, Riker returned to cell 66, his shirt torn, his hands bruised, but his eyes steady. Karnak on the left made a low grunt of approval. Vekral tapped the wall with a slow rhythm like a heartbeat or a warning. Respect had begun to grow between monsters and man. But Kolf was not done. He watched from the shadows and smiled with teeth that had bitten through armor. He met with the oldest inmates in the deep dark of Block D, where the walls bled rust and the floor hummed from the gravity field. There he made his real plan. He would not kill Riker in the yard. He would not strike with blades or fists. He would break him from the inside. He would make the guards turn. He would twist the system, use rules and lies and fear until the humans stood alone again. And then he would crush him. The next day, rumors spread like smoke. Guards started getting strange orders from the upper levels. Riker's food was delayed. His training times cut. One of his allies, a small insectoid named Chick, was transferred to isolation without reason. The cameras in cell 66 blinked more than usual. Riker felt the shift. He knew something was coming. But he waited. He planned. He adapted. While Kolf used fear, Riker used pattern. While Kolf whispered, Riker listened. The tension inside Zirian 9 thickened. Fights increased. Accidents happened. A guard was found unconscious with a bruised neck and no memory. The warden began asking questions, but got only silence from the ranks. Something old and dangerous was waking up in the dark halls of the prison. And at the center stood two beings who had faced each other on firelit fields, now locked inside steel and silence, waiting for the first real move. Riker sat in the yard again, alone again, but not forgotten. Even the guards who once mocked him now watched with caution. Even the inmates who once laughed now gave him space. He did not smile. He did not speak. He waited, because he knew the truth. Kolf could not win in the open. He would come through others, through fear, through poison in the mind. But Riker had something Kolf could never understand. Discipline, patience, control. And in Zirian 9, those were weapons stronger than claws or rage or fire. The next morning, a siren wailed across the blocks, not loud, but strange. A signal, a warning, a beginning. And Riker knew the real battle had begun. The siren echoed through the steel walls like a scream, without a voice, warning every soul in Zirian 9 that something was wrong, something strange, something coming. The red lights flickered as if the prison itself had paused to think, as if the walls knew what was about to begin. Guards ran down the upper halls calling for backup, while security drones buzzed like angry insects around the yard. Prisoners looked around, confused, afraid, excited, waiting for someone to scream, waiting for blood. But Riker did not move. He stood near the broken weight bench, eyes scanning every door, every vent, every shadow like a hunter in a forest of metal. Then the riot started, not with fire or explosions, but with a single punch. An inmate in Block C slammed his food tray into a guard's face, then shouted a name, not his own, but Kolf's. That was the signal. The others followed. Screams echoed down the levels as inmates charged the fences, tore down, cameras blocked gates with tables and bodies and wires ripped from the walls. Kolf had started the fire, and now it spread through Zirian 9 like a storm of claws and teeth and rage. Riker saw it unfold. He saw the gates drop around the mess hall, the power flicker, the guards retreat. And he saw the real plan. This was not just chaos. This was a trap. While the riot pulled attention, Kolf and his core group slipped through a blind spot in the main hallway toward the security wing, where weapons were stored behind blast doors and retina scans. If Kolf took the armory, the prison would fall. Riker knew he could run, stay hidden, wait for it to end. But he moved. He ran against the flow through smoke and shouting, and fists past burning beds and fallen guards his mind, sharp his steps, fast his mission clear. He reached the lower corridor just in time to see the blast doors crack open and Kolf stepping inside, with 6 followers, 2 of them armed already. Riker did not wait. He picked up a fallen stun baton and charged forward, striking the first guard across the neck, spinning into the second with a shoulder blow that dropped him. Kolf turned surprised, angry, ready. The 2 locked eyes again like they had on Thessar Prime, but this time there were no armies, only steel, only space, only fury. They clashed. Kolf swung wide with a shock blade. Riker ducked low and drove his elbow into Kolf's ribs, the sound of cracking armor filling the small room. One of Kolf's men lunged, but Riker twisted, grabbed the alien's arm, and flipped him into a wall, knocking him out cold. Kolf roared and tackled Riker to the ground, but Riker wrapped his legs around Kolf's waist, rolled, and slammed him into the corner with the force of a charging beast. The armory shook. The lights flickered again. Alarms howled. But Riker kept fighting. Kolf was strong, but wild, burning with old hate. Riker was calm, cold, focused, every move calculated like a blade through silk. He struck Kolf's jaw, then swept his leg and brought him down hard, disarming him with a twist of the wrist and locking his arm behind his back. Guards finally arrived and saw Riker standing over the warlord, breathing heavy, but steady, blood on his face, but his eyes clear. They aimed their rifles, unsure, afraid. Riker raised his hands and stepped back, letting them take Kolf away in chains again. But something had changed. Not just in the room, not just in the air. In the silence that followed, something shifted deep in the minds of those watching. The guards looked at Riker not with fear, but with something older, something deeper. Respect. The prisoners who had seen the battle from the hallway said nothing as Riker passed. They moved aside. They lowered their heads. Even Karnak and Vekral in cell 66 tapped once on their walls that night, not as threat, but as honor. The next day, Riker walked the yard again, alone again, but not alone. The guards no longer taunted him. They nodded. Cyril, the young guard who once laughed, now watched Riker like a soldier watches a leader. He brought extra food. That morning left it near Riker without a word. And Riker took it with a nod. He had not asked for power, but now he held it. Not in words, not in orders. In action, in silence, in control. Chick returned from isolation limping, but alive, whispering that it was Riker's name that saved him, that even the warden had asked about the human in cell 66. Now, whispers moved in a different way. Not of killing him, but of following him, of learning from him. Some younger inmates began to train near Riker in the yard, copying his movements, lifting when he lifted, watching how he breathed. He did not teach, but they learned. And through it all, he said almost nothing, because Riker knew words were easy to twist. But action stayed true. He had survived the worst prison in the galaxy. He had stopped the strongest warlord without killing him. He had made monsters pause, and guards listen, all without raising his voice. Now he sat again on his bunk, arms folded, eyes closed, not sleeping, only waiting. Because he knew it was not over. Kolf had failed, but others would rise. The prison was changing, and he was now at the center. A human from a death world who became more than a survivor. He became a symbol. And even behind the thick walls of cell 66, Riker's silence roared louder than any scream. The walls of Zirian 9 seemed quieter after the riot, but Riker knew better than to trust silence, because silence in a place like this was not peace, it was planning. Kolf was locked away and solitary, his empire broken for now, his followers scattered or afraid, but power never truly disappeared. It only moved, it only changed hands, and Riker felt it shifting like pressure before a storm. He had grown in the eyes of everyone, now, not just the inmates, but the guards too. Even the warden had his name in reports and security logs marked with symbols that meant unpredictable and unknown. Some guards hated him more for it, some respected him, some feared him, but one thing was certain: no one ignored him. He noticed small things change around him, fewer patrols near his cell, longer camera sweeps, odd gaps in the routine that never used to happen, and he knew someone was moving pieces behind the scenes. Cyril warned him, first the young guard with quiet eyes who once brought him food, now came with whispers instead. They are planning something, he said. They want you gone. Riker asked, nothing, only nodded, because he already knew this place was not just metal and fire, it was mines, it was lies, it was pressure built over years, and now that pressure wanted to crush him. The plan came slowly dressed as routine. Riker was assigned to maintenance in the lower corridors, near the power relays, a place where cameras often glitched and signals faded. He went anyway, because refusing orders in Zirian 9 was a trap by itself. 2 guards escorted him down past locked gates and flickering lights, past warning signs and cracked floors, until they reached the tunnel with old wiring and humming walls. Then they left him alone. Riker stood still for a moment, eyes scanning every corner, every shadow, every sound. Then the lights failed. Total black. Not normal black. The kind of black that eats the edges of your mind, that makes sound feel louder, that turns air into something sharp. From the dark came the hiss of metal and the soft hum of charged weapons. They did not speak. They did not need to. 3 figures moved through the dark, trained killers, silent, swift, armed with shock blades and stealth gear. Their orders clear: eliminate the human and make it look like an accident. But Riker had been hunted before. He stepped left just as the first blade came down, missing his neck by inches, then spun low, sweeping the legs of the first attacker and crashing him into the floor. The second lunged with a blade, but Riker grabbed his wrist, twisted, and used the momentum to throw him into the third, who stumbled and slammed into a control panel, sparking the lights back on. Now they could see his eyes. Not angry, not afraid. Focused, sharp, unbroken. The fight ended in less than a minute. 1 groaned on the floor. 1 lay still. The third crawled backward, blood trailing from his mouth, whispering please like it would save him. Riker turned and walked away. He left them breathing, but only just. Later that day, the warden read the report with a frown and no words, because even now there were no official records of the 3 attackers, no camera logs, no orders on file. It was a ghost strike and had failed. Riker returned to the yard as if nothing had happened, his shirt torn, his hands marked, but his posture steady. The inmates watched from the shadows, whispering again. Not about Kolth, not about power, about the human who survived the trap, who faced death like a routine, and walked away. Cyril met him again later near the old kitchen, where few guards dared to go, and handed him a packet of water and a small folded piece of cloth. It had writing on it. 1 word. Why? Riker looked at it, then looked up at Cyril, who waited with nervous eyes. Riker spoke for the first time, that weak, his voice calm. Because someone has to. Cyril nodded, without understanding, but with respect. The message was spreading, not in speeches, not in commands, but in moments like these, quiet moments with meaning deeper than rules or chains. The next morning, Karnak growled something from his cell, and Vekral tapped the wall twice. A signal, an offer, not a friendship, of understanding. The prison had changed again, and Riker was the reason. But he felt the shift too. He felt the weight of eyes above him, eyes that did not blink, eyes that wanted control, not of him, but through him. He was becoming more than a problem. He was becoming an idea, and ideas could not be chained. He walked the corridors now, with calm steps. Guards moved aside, some out of fear, some out of habit. He trained alone, but no longer unnoticed. Even inmates from rival gangs kept distance, not out of weakness, but out of calculation. Because hurting Riker now meant shaking the fragile balance that held Zirian 9 together. And no one wanted that. Not yet. But Riker knew it would not last. The system was built to break balance, to crush peace, to turn order into ashes. Someone up high was still pulling strings, still trying to decide who lived and who vanished. And he had survived their first move. Now he waited for the next. Because it would come. It always did. The lights died without warning across Zirian 9, and the alarms that followed were not like the usual drills or riot warnings. They were sharp, broken, echoing through the steel halls like screams trapped inside metal lungs. The prison fell into darkness, and then into silence, as if something had reached inside the heart of the station and turned it cold and still. In the command tower, the warden shouted for answers, but none came. The cameras blinked out one by one, the doors locked, and unlocked at random, the power core shifted like something alive and angry. Someone had taken control. Not fully, not yet, but enough to bring chaos. Riker stood in the yard when the first blast doors slammed shut, cutting the main halls from the upper levels. The sky above was red with system failure lights, and the smell of burning wires spread like fog. He knew what this was. This was not a riot. This was not an accident. This was a takeover. Kolth had moved again. Somehow, from inside, solitary from behind a cell that should have been sealed, he had reached out, pulled strings, found loyal hands, and turned them against the system. Weapons vanished from the secure lockers. Drones stopped answering orders. Old power lines rerouted in patterns only someone with high access could create. This was planned long before the riot, long before the failed ambush. And Riker knew. It had only just begun. He turned toward the mess hall, where inmates now gathered, some armed with makeshift weapons, others with stolen stun rifles, all wearing the same look of fear mixed with hope, because they thought maybe this was their chance. But Riker saw what they did not. This was not freedom. This was destruction, the kind that eats everything. He moved fast past broken gates, past sparks falling from the ceiling, past prisoners trying to escape, and others trying to rule. He found Cyril near the control node, bleeding from a cut on his side, holding a shock baton with shaking hands, his eyes wide with panic. They locked the warden inside the tower, Cyril said. They cut power to the upper guard decks, and they released Kolth. Riker grabbed a broken shield from the floor and looked around, scanning the chaos, listening for the pattern inside the madness. He knew where Kolth would go. The control bridge. Not to escape, to rule. To turn Zirian 9 into something worse than a prison. A fortress. An empire. Riker turned and shouted, not in fear, but with force, with command, with the voice of a soldier who had stood in fire before. Follow me or die here. It was not a question. It was not a plea. It was a choice. And some followed. Not many, but enough. Inmates who once feared him now trusted him. Guards who once watched him now stood beside him. Together they moved like a wave through fire and smoke, through screams and broken metal, following the only man who seemed unshaken by the fall of order. They reached the lift shaft and climbed not through doors, but along the rails, through sparks and heat and ash, until they reached the upper deck, where Kolth waited with his last loyal fighters. Kolth stood near the control table, the lights behind him flickering blue, his eyes glowing with rage and triumph, his voice loud over the system speakers. Zirian 9 belongs to the strong, he said. Riker stepped into view, shield in one hand, baton in the other, face covered in ash and blood, eyes calm and sharp. Then, come take it, he said. Kolth roared and charged. The two clashed like war-made flesh, fists and weapons and rage, and will crashing into each other with every step shaking the floor. Kolth was strong, faster than before, driven by fury, but Riker was precise, focused, every move chosen, every strike calculated like numbers on a map. Their fight lit up the bridge with fire and noise until Riker found the opening and drove his baton into Kolth's side, then threw him against the control panel with a sound like thunder. The others froze, then dropped their weapons. It was done. Kolth was alive, but broken again. And this time, there was no army waiting to rebuild him. Riker turned to the main console and looked at the flickering controls. Cyril stepped forward, handing him the key chip taken from a fallen guard captain. Riker slid it in and brought the systems back online, piece by piece, gate by gate, block by block. The prison lit up again. Red to white. Chaos to control. When it was over, Riker walked back through the halls with no escort, no chains, no orders. Inmates nodded. Guards stood aside. Even Karnak and Vekral in cell 66 tapped the walls 3 times, a rhythm of respect, a sound of change. Riker said nothing. He returned to his cell, sat on his bunk, and closed his eyes for one long moment of silence. Not sleep, just stillness. Because he knew it was not the end. It was only the turning point. Zirian 9 had seen fire and blood. Now it had seen something else. Honor. Order. A human who came not to destroy, but to endure and lead. And as the warden watched the footage in silence, he whispered something no one heard. Let him stay. Because even monsters need someone to fear. And even darkness needs a light that does not flicker. The sun above Zirian 9 never truly rose, it only burned dim behind thick clouds of radiation and ash, but something had changed within the prison, something quiet, something deep like a breath held too long finally being released. Kolth was gone, dragged back to solitary under the watch of 3 drones, and 2 silent guards no longer feared, no longer followed his empire, shattered, his voice lost in echoing halls that no longer listened. The riot was over, the power restored, the scars still fresh across every block, but the fear had shifted its shape, the chaos had found a center, and that center was human. Riker walked the corridors now not as a ghost, not as a threat, but as something else, something the others could not name, but all understood. The guards no longer watched him with suspicion. They moved with him, spoke to him, asked him questions, and listened when he answered. Cyril walked beside him each day, now not as a handler, but as a partner, quiet and alert, learning from a man who had once been his enemy. Even the warden, who never left the tower, now spoke through the speakers with a different tone when he said the name Riker with weight, with care, as if the name itself had become part of the structure, like a beam holding up the roof. Inmates trained in the yard, not in gangs, not in fear, but in silence, watching the human copy his movements, copy his patience, his strength, not just a body but a mind. Fights still happened, but they ended faster, fewer blades drawn, fewer bones, broken, more arguments, solved with words or with silence that came when Riker stepped into view. He had never asked for this, never wanted it, never planned it, but it had formed around him like armor, not forged by fire, but by choice. Karnak from cell 65 now sat each morning watching the yard, his great arms crossed, saying nothing, but nodding once when Riker passed. Vekral, who once scratched the walls like a beast, now cleaned his corner, kept his space clear, moved with purpose, and tapped the wall only once each night in a rhythm that meant safe. The warden called a meeting 1 week later, summoning Riker to the upper bridge where stars hung outside the windows like frozen sparks, and the hum of power filled the air like breath. He offered Riker a deal, a ship, a pass, full pardon, a way home, back to Earth, back to a world that had moved on without him. Riker looked at the stars, then at the map of the prison, blinking red and green with signals of life, of motion, of pain and growth, and he shook his head slowly. Not yet, he said. The warden did not argue. He only nodded and said, I understand. Riker returned to the lower levels, not with sadness, not with regret, but with the steady steps of someone who had already made peace with the fire inside him. He knew Earth was still there, but so was this place, this broken place filled with killers and lost souls and silent screams, and it had become something more. It had become a second chance. Not just for him, for everyone. Chick returned from recovery, and now serve in the med bay, helping those hurt in the riot, working under a guard who once tried to strike him, now saved by his own hand during the blackout. Old enemies became quiet allies. Old rules were broken, rebuilt, reshaped, not with war, but with will. Riker sat on the edge of the yard one evening as the fall sky flickered above and watched the others move, not like beasts, but like men and women trying to remember how to stand again. He remembered his first day, remembered the stares, the laughter, the threat in every eye. And now they nodded. They listened, not because he was strong, because he stood when they could not, because he did not break, because he never asked to lead, but always walked forward. The air smelled like oil and metal and old stone, but there was a breeze to it now, as if even the machines had taken a breath. Zirian 9 was still a prison, but it was no longer only that. It was a place of waiting, a place of watching, and now a place of change. Riker stood and walked the edge of the yard, hands behind his back boots, silent against the cracked floor. He looked up, not for escape, but for time. Time to finish what had begun. Time to see who would rise next. Because someone always did, and he would be there. Not with chains, not with fire, with silence, with presence, with the quiet strength that had turned beasts into men and fear into respect. The galaxy would not sing his name, but here, in the darkest corner of space, in the belly of Zirian 9, Dean Riker had become something greater than a soldier, greater than a prisoner. He had become the wall between chaos and order. He had become a myth that walked in daylight. He had become the one no one dared to cross. And still he asked for nothing, because he already had what he came for. Not freedom, not revenge, purpose, and in a place built to destroy purpose. That was victory,